Hi there, welcome back. Last week we took a break because of the Independence Day festivities. But Get Me Right is back. A weekend deep dive show where I unravel and unspool a subject so that you understand like nowhere else. I choose the issue with some topicality in mind, so it's relevant. And it's also for posterity. Even after the immediate news value is gone, you can come back to it as a record of reference. So remember to tune in every week on Saturdays and Sundays. Get me right. This week, like I always do, two topics. Earlier in the week, a testy social media exchange caught my attention between the spokesperson of the Chinese embassy in New Delhi and the secretary of the Office of the Dalai Lama on who could be the next Dalai Lama, the present Dalai Lama's successor. It was yet another instance of China refashioning the world to its own fancies, or attempting to. We'll go deep into the issue. Also in this edition, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's whirlwind tour of Europe, including to Kiev, Ukraine, which had the world watching closely. We'll understand the short and long implications for India. Let's get going. The Dalai Lama is the supreme spiritual and temporal leader of Tibetan Buddhism. The incumbent is 14th in succession since the institution started sometime in the 14th century. His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, is recovering after a knee replacement surgery in the United States and should be back in India this coming week. Just ahead of his arrival, the issue of his successor, the 15th Dalai Lama, turned into a debate in New Delhi because of the exchange I just mentioned. Yu Jing, the new spokesperson of the Chinese embassy, posted on her X handle that the discovery of the next Dalai Lama would have to be within the ambit of Chinese laws. It's actually called reincarnation, but I would come to that in a bit. Jing was responding to a newspaper column a day earlier, written by Secretary of the Office of Dalai Lama in New Delhi, Dundup Gyalpo. In the column, Gyalpo delved on the possibility of the world having two Dalai Lamas in the future, one appointed by China and the other a reincarnation as per the customs and traditions of Tibetan Buddhist faith. Gyalpo underscored that Tibetans revere Dalai Lama as the emanation of Avalokiteshvar, the patron saint of Tibet. He is the ultimate symbol of Tibet as a nation and its people. And given that since ancient times, the issue of reincarnation of the next Dalai Lama has been handled 13 times, the incumbent being the 14th, even this time the followers of the faith would be able to do it on their own. So far, so good. What got the grouse of the Chinese spokey, it seems, is that Gyalpo questioned the Chinese locus, China's right to have any say in the process. Despite controlling Tibet since 1959, the year the Dalai Lama escaped from Lhasa and made his way to India in exile, in the eyes of many in the world, legitimacy of Chinese territorial claims have been tenuous at best. Only last month, for example, President Joe Biden of the United States signed into law the Resolve Tibet Act, which denies the historicity of China's territorial claims over Tibet. The new law calls for China to have an unconditional dialogue with the Dalai Lama and his representatives over the future of Tibet. More significantly, the act does not call Tibet an integral part of China and goes on to demarcate the exact boundaries of what constitutes Tibet as distinct from China on the map. The United States has earlier passed two more Tibet-specific laws, one each in 2002 and 2020. The latest one seems toughest in posturing, mincing no words on Chinese claims and conduct. But coming back to the hot exchange, a peeved Jing hit back with a dismissive tone and a certain brashness that characterizes a new generation of China's diplomats called wolf warriors. Jing said that the process of discovery of the next Dalai Lama would be subject to Chinese laws. She also repeated the standard Chinese position that Xinjiang, as the Chinese call the territory, has been part of China since ancient times and is an internal affair of the PRC. To quote her verbatim, the reincarnation of living Buddhas, including the Dalai Lama, must comply with Chinese laws and regulations and follow religious rituals and historical conventions, unquote. She also repeated an earlier Chinese claim that the selection of the present Dalai Lama in 1939 was done with the approval of the then government of China. It was the turn of Gyalpo to put the record straight again. It seems the Chinese only manipulated facts, even real-time telegrams, to make it look like they were involved, all for the sake of posterity. A picture of Chinese envoy Wu Yongxin with the Dalai Lama in 1940 was not of the day of the enthronement ceremony in 1940, for which Wu had been deputed by Beijing to be in Lhasa. It was, in fact, of a few days later when the Chinese envoy was granted a private audience with the new Dalai Lama, like other envoys, including from the British India. Interestingly, I found out that to be present during the ceremony, the Chinese had to take a visa for their representative from the British, giving ample evidence of the Tibetan territory being under loose British suzerainty. In any case, not at all a Chinese one. The British India office in Delhi made it incumbent upon a no objection certificate from the government in Lhasa to issue a visa to the Chinese delegation, which subsequently travelled to Tibet via India. Not only that, while issuing the no objection certificate, the Lhasa government put restrictions on the size of the Chinese delegation that would participate in the Dalai Lama's reincarnation ceremony. Now listen to more of what happened. The Chinese applied for visa with British India in the month of April of 1939. The government in Lhasa sent its consent on August 31. The British Indian government in Delhi approved visas for the 19-member Chinese delegation on October 5, and the delegation, led by Wu Yongxin, left Chongqing on October 21 and traveled through Hong Kong, Burma and India, sometimes flying, sometimes using sea route, and then via the land route to reach Lhasa in January of 1940. Imagine, had it been a relationship of central and state governments between Beijing and Lhasa, it would not have taken so many permissions, a British visa and an indirect journey of 3 months for the Chinese to be present during the coronation ceremony of the present Dalai Lama. The nationalist government in Beijing subsequently released an edict, a sort of gazette notification, on February 5, 1940, trying to own up to the reincarnation ceremony of the 14th Dalai Lama. The edict number 898 said that China approves the status of 5-year-old boy Lamo Thondup as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama. Now imagine how foolish the Chinese could be, at least at that time. The process of locating the reincarnation or successor of the 13th Dalai Lama, who had died in 1933, had been set in motion by the Tibetan government in 1937, 4 years before the Chinese edict owning up the Dalai Lama's reincarnation. A party led by High Lama Kyutsang Rinpoche had wandered through the hills and valleys, villages and towns of Tibet for 6 months and more in 1938 and located the boy Lamo Thondup in Taksar near Kombom in Amdo province of Tibet. Forget about a role in the search. The Chinese did not know what was happening. Is that funny enough? No, let me give you more. Since the Communist Party-led government came to power in China in 1949, they have been after the present Dalai Lama. Just a couple of anecdotes on how the Chinese have conducted themselves. When the first meeting happened between Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and the 19-year-old Lama in Beijing in 1954, the Chinese did not allow the two to speak directly in English. With Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai by their side, Lama spoke in Tibetan, which was translated by a translator to Mandarin, and then the second translator present there translated the Mandarin back to English. Anecdote 2. The Chinese have brought in two laws, one in 1992, which says that recognition will not be given to a reincarnation who has escaped to a foreign country. Obviously, the target is the present Dalai Lama, and the possibility of him anointing his successor from outside China. The second law was brought in 2011 after the Dalai Lama said that he would not be reborn in Chinese-controlled Tibet because on that soil he could not serve as a free champion of the Tibetan people. The law now forbids the Dalai Lama to be reborn anywhere but on Chinese-controlled soil. The Chinese government also launched a search engine collecting information on 1,300 plus probable Dalai Lamas. All the names are approved by the Chinese, and guess what? Dalai and Tenzing Gyatso, associated with the present one, are blocked from the search. China sees the Dalai Lama as a separatist. He has been variously called a wolf in a monk's robe or a beast with a man's face. Imagine the irony. An atheistic communist regime wanting to control an avowedly religious process of reincarnation. For Tibetans, Dalai Lama is an article of faith. For the Chinese, a tool for furthering its expansionist agenda. Luckily, the Dalai Lama has spoken with a lot of clarity and foresight on his successor. Irrespective of what the Chinese pull out of their hat, the Tibetans around the world would go by what the Dalai Lama ordains. The world is also pushing back. I mentioned the American law which Biden signed last month. In India, host to the Dalai Lama since his exile in 1959, as recently as the budget session, we had a Rajya Sabha member from Sikkim, Dorji Shering Lepcha, urged the government to call China border Tibet border.
जैसे आपको पता है जो बॉर्डर है इधर अरुणाचल लेह लद्दाख से लेकर सिक्किम तक करीब 1400 किलोमीटर है, करीब 1400 किलोमीटर है। हम लोग बोलते हैं जैसे कि चाइना बॉर्डर, ये चाइना बॉर्डर नहीं, ये नथुला बॉर्डर है, ये चाइना बॉर्डर नहीं, ये तिब्बत बॉर्डर है। क्योंकि जो जितना भी ये एलओसी है इसमें चाइना नहीं है, इसमें तिब्बत है।
It's a matter of record. Maps of the Ming dynasty that ruled China from 14th to 17th century show Tibet as outside the boundaries of the kingdom, with suzerainty relationship perhaps centered around paying tributes and accepting titles. And lest we forget, as late as 1940, a Chinese envoy needed an Indian visa to reach Tibet. Moving on, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has just returned from a whirlwind Europe trip to Poland and Ukraine. Both very important for us not to register on Get Me Right. It was first visit by an Indian Prime Minister to Poland in 45 years, and first by any since Ukraine emerged out of the erstwhile USSR in 1991. Those factoids apart, it is to the credit of Modi that he has pushed Indian diplomacy into uncharted territories to expand India's sphere of contact, if not outright influence. Well, there can't be influence without contact, and the Modi government, per one estimate, has connected with at least 50 nations which had not seen an Indian leader visiting them for between 3 to 5 decades. Case in point, Mozambique. When External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar touched down on Maputo, Mozambique's capital, in April last year, it was first time since India's independence that a leader was visiting the Southeast African country orbiting the Indian Ocean. Last decade has seen India establishing diplomatic missions in 21 countries, mostly in Africa, but many in Europe as well. The last one being just this month, when we operationalized our embassy in Tirana, the capital of Albania. Let's go one by one. As the war broke out in 2022, with the Russian attack on Ukraine, it is Poland that has handled much of the humanitarian effort, including largest number of refugees from the conflict zone. It is effectively the only entry port for Ukraine, one which Prime Minister Modi also used to take a 10-hour train ride into Kiev. Joe Biden, Emmanuel Macron, Rishi Sunak, and Olaf Scholz all took the same route to visit Kiev in solidarity with Ukraine. In fact, Poland takes over the EU presidency next year. That sort of underscores the topical significance of Poland as part of Central Europe. Hence the upgradation of the neglected relationship to a strategic partnership during Prime Minister's visit. Even otherwise, the Modi government, as part of its larger engagement push, which I mentioned earlier, has focused on Europe also, with Prime Minister making 26 trips for bilateral and multilateral engagements in his 11 years at the helm. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar has done better, with 29 in his 5 years alone. India has signed a trade agreement with EFTA bloc, which includes Norway, Switzerland, Iceland, and Liechtenstein recently. We are in talks for a free trade deal with the larger European Union, as also, of course, the United Kingdom, which should happen soon. Look at the irony now. Warsaw, the capital of Poland, is the place where anti-NATO Warsaw Pact was signed between the Soviet Union and its 7 East European socialist bloc allies: Albania, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Hungary, Poland, and Romania. That was in 1955. The Cold War was shaping up, and these Eastern Bloc countries thought NATO's rearming of West Germany was a threat. They needed to band together. Cut to the present. All the erstwhile members of the Warsaw Pact are now part of NATO, Poland included. With Sweden exceeding as a member, NATO is now 32 states strong. When the Cold War ended, NATO had 16 member states, having grown only by 4 since its setting up in 1949. But when the raison d'etre, the reason for the military alliance, the Cold War with Soviet Russia ended with the dissolution of the USSR, NATO continued to expand. Finland and Sweden have joined the grouping after Russia launched its Ukraine war in 2022. Now, just for an irony, which is sad and stupid in equal parts, USSR wanted to join NATO in 1954 and was denied. President Putin has been offering to become a member but has been turned down. Obviously, because the West needs a villain, not peace. So when Modi visited Moscow last month, his photo op with Putin was met with opprobrium, harsh criticism in Western capitals. Putin did not help with a missile strike on a hospital in Kiev, which claimed the lives of 5 children just a day before Modi arrived in Moscow. President Zelensky was most trenchant in his choice of words, calling the visit a huge disappointment and a devastating blow to peace efforts. Remember, this even though Modi had met Zelensky only a fortnight before on the sidelines of the G7 summit in Italy. Including the meeting the two had in Bali on the sidelines of G20 in 2022, Modi has met Zelensky more times than Putin. But that's how narratives get woven. Given this backdrop, the Kiev visit should make the West see reason on India's balancing act with clean hands. It is not a zero-sum game for us, even if it is for the Western nations. Visiting Kiev on the eve of Ukraine's Independence Day is also not happenstance. There is a message there by India. It was important that we continue to engage with Russia so that it does not fall further into Chinese vortex, making Beijing influence, if not outrightly set, Moscow's foreign policy positions. An increasingly strong Beijing-Moscow axis towards which, surprisingly, the Western strategic thinkers have been blind to. By visiting Kiev within a month, Modi has assuaged concerns that our Russia tilt was at the expense of the West. Specifically on Ukraine, let's not forget, Soviet presidents, Brezhnev, who stood by India during 1971 war, and Khrushchev, who coined Hindi Rusi Bhai Bhai, both were Ukraine-born. Of the tremendous military hardware of Russian vintage that India has, a good one-third were manufactured in plants located in Ukrainian territory from the Soviet era. Ukraine today is war-torn. It's broken, not just in physical infrastructure, but as a society. A friend who visited Kiev and some other parts of the war-ravaged territory informed me that it might take generations for the Ukrainians to bury the mental trauma of this war. The scars would take a long time to heal. It is here, in rebuilding Ukraine from scratch, that India should look forward to an enduring partnership. Prime Minister Modi, with his visit, has opened a window for India and Ukraine to bury the past and look ahead. Future is here, and it's not a zero-sum game. Thanks for watching.